Sir, I want to start today with a simple question which has multiple dimensions. What the heck is happening in the world? Have you ever seen this in your long, illustrious career? Have you seen international order being trashed like this? There being no international law. I remember a professor who used to say there is nothing like international law. It's only the law of the mighty. But are we living that? Probably after World War II or after what Germany did, it has never been thrashed this openly. So what the heck is going on, sir? If you could please start by talking about US, Iran, Venezuela, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, everything under the sun. Thank you for joining, sir.
Well, we've gone through very bad phases even before. I mean, we've forgotten now because one doesn't, keep recalling these ups and downs in international life every day. Now, if you recall what happened during the Iraq War, over a long period, the whole inspection thing and the way in the entire game was played out, and eventually the military intervention, and then Saddam Hussein, in effect, executed, hung, and the manner in which this was done. Similarly, the attack on Libya, uh, the manner in which it was done, etc., etc. And of course, long before, if we go back in time, the entire Vietnam War and the kind of campus protests that there were in the United States, uh, the position that India even took at that time on the Vietnam War. I mean, we've gone through these phases, the breakup of Yugoslavia also. But the difference is this, that the US leadership, while it was engaged in all these adventures, still tried to get the cover of international law. The UN was involved, the UN inspections regimes were involved. Still talk of an international law, UN Charter, self-defense, Article 51, uh, rules-based international order, uh, etc., human rights. You know, the ethical, moral cover was always given to these interventions. The big change now is that Trump is not at all bothered how his actions are seen. In fact, he and his henchmen are very brutal about this, openly saying that these niceties don't matter. As the deputy chief of staff of the White House said, that these are all niceties. They don't matter. Ultimately, it's power that counts. And when Trump was asked by New York Times whether there were any constraints on his power of international law, he says, no, I don't believe in international law. And he was asked again whether there was anything that could put a restraint on him. He says, my own morality, my own mind. So he's totally unbothered about how the world sees what he's doing, because he's so confident about US power and the fact that there's no one that can impose sanctions on the US or punish US for its misdeeds. See, the other thing is I mean, if you were to talk about this in terms of a person, you would say that there is some personality disorder, because on the one hand, he is totally, how should I say, unbothered about, as I said, about how the world sees what he's doing, and at the same time he says he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, this whole business about stopping 8 wars
He's
and this.
buying it, sir. Now he's saying that she may give it to me and I might take it. And I read something. I don't know. See, nowadays it's difficult to know what you're reading is a satire or is true, because they say Norway is saying that there is no concept of gifting the Nobel Peace Prize. You can gift the money. So whether
Yes.
that's satire or that's serious clarification that they had to issue, I'm not sure, because I saw a tweet on that.
No, I think they meant it seriously, because when he was asked, Trump was asked whether when she comes and she offers you the Nobel Peace Prize, because she did. He says, "Well, I'll take it as an honor." So it was not meant tongue in cheek. And then I think before this thing, Sharad was carried too far. The Nobel uh, Peace Prize Committee thought that it was good to issue a clarification that this could neither be transferred nor revoked. Uh, but he's still
Sir,
at it. So the big difference, to answer your question, is this: that it is now reliance on raw power, on the fact that it is the balance of power that decides how international relations should be conducted. There is no UN charter, there is no international law, there is nothing of the kind. It's just the capacity to be able to get your way through the use of force. Now, abducting a serving head of state, in this case of Venezuela, is totally against all norms of international law and the UN Charter. In fact, a serving head of state has immunity. It is against the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Also, not that he's not done that before, because the entire structure of secondary sanctions is based on the application of domestic law to other countries. So here he says they got a ruling from a district court or whatever in New York, and that was enough legal justification. Rubio said that to go and kidnap a foreign president. So if they could do in Venezuela, theoretically, they could do it elsewhere if their calculation was that they can get away with it. If the risks are too high, probably they won't do it. Because if
sir,
American soldiers are killed and there are casualties on the ground, he may think twice. But if he can get away with airstrikes and that sort of a thing, as he did in Iran, he will do it.
sir, before coming to Iran specifically, and more than Iran, also China, Russia, India, I would want to cover that specifically. But why I started by saying it's different, because I don't recall any time NATO was fighting this bitterly. Greenland has to officially come out and say we want to be with Denmark. Denmark politicians, whatever their military might may be, have to say, "Oh, we will fight back," and European Union has to respond to it. So, has any American president uh, actually ever gone after European powers who were a part of NATO? So, in that sense, he is going all across the world. Venezuela is one thing, Iraq and etc. was one region. So, Venezuela he wants, Iran he wants, Bangladesh he has certain role, and now even in Europe. So in that sense, there are no friends, nobody in a sense which is sacrosanct. Canada, every day he says what should be the 51st state. We have forgotten that. 1 year ago he was calling it the 51st state. So entire region that US has done, sir, does that have any parallel, and how would it play out in the European mind now? Because till now we have seen Europe broadly as a lackey of US. But would they develop a spine, or are they forced to develop a spine now? What is the situation there?
Couple of things here on Greenland. I was listening to what President Putin said, recalling the history of US claims on Greenland, which go back to the 19th century. In fact, they wanted to take over Greenland, pay money for it, the way they bought Alaska, but the US Congress said no. Then in 1910, there was discussion between US, Denmark, and Greenland to take over Greenland, but somehow it fizzled out. So it's not as if the US claims on Greenland are suddenly new. They have been there in the past. And I sense from what President Putin was saying was that, well, if Putin wants if Trump wants Greenland, let him take it. I suppose his calculation is that the entire basis of the US Western European narrative on Russia's action in Ukraine, etc., will fall flat. Absolutely. And that it would, in fact, more than justify what Putin is doing in Ukraine. But anyway, the question you asked about Europe.
European mind,
He has in the past said quite openly that he's he would like the European Union to be disbanded. He's against the European Union as such. He applauded Britain for quitting the EU, he sees the EU as a challenge to America. In fact, he got after Germany in his first term, where he said that, and generally Europe, that I give them protection, they don't spend enough money on defense, but they compete with us economically because the money they could have spent on defense, they are spending it on their economy to be more competitive and sell more to us. And in other words, they're becoming a patsy insofar as Europe is concerned. And on NATO, again, he said that we bear the entire burden and we are spending all the money. These people again are not spending enough on their defense. They're concentrating on their economy and posing a economic competition to us. So that has been his reason for also opposing NATO. So you were right that he has alienated Europe. Europe doesn't have much of a choice because uh, they are entirely dependent on the United States for their security, and more so. Earlier on, it was the Cold War, and then, of course, uh, the potential Russian threat, which may emerge at some stage when a resurgent Russia uh, redevelops its economic and military sinews, and being such a huge country, uh, neighboring Europe, Europe felt they were under threat, and NATO kept expanding. But now, uh, Russia has uh, has attacked Ukraine, and they have completely supported earlier Biden and the American position. They have cut all their links uh, with Russia, even productive links. After all, if they were getting cheap energy, what was wrong with it? What is our own discourse regarding energy? That in our national interest, we'll buy energy from where it is the cheapest because it is very vital for our economy. Similarly, Europe is energy short. So if they could get energy from this huge country next door, which have massive resources, what was wrong with it? It is not, but they looked upon it as some kind of a geopolitical crime to buy uh, gas from Russia, and they blew up the Nord Stream. So, in other words, they cut all contacts, and they're cutting more and more contacts with Russia by more and more sanctions. I think the sixth or whatever uh, round of sanctions has been imposed by Europe. They want to confiscate their reserves, which is totally against international law. So, in this situation, what do they do? How do they counter the United States? How do they take up, uh, let's say, arms? Because France and some other country, UK, they said that we can send our forces there or something like that, etc. But the long and short is that they cannot, given the fact that they are now so exposed insofar as their perceived threat from the East is concerned, they can't afford to take a strong stand against the United States. They have been totally humiliated. They have been
But
humiliated.
that's how, yeah, so sorry. That's why I was asking that it's absolute humiliation when another sovereign nation comes out and says, I will take Greenland, I'll buy it, or I'll take it by arms. And he mocks the entire European Union. He mocks the French president in a almost a college manner when you mock somebody. So, and this earlier he was doing it to Africa or to some other nations, but to do it to Europe, which has a sense of past and continuity. How do you think, sir, that is playing out in the politicians' mind there, the diplomats' mind there? How is the uh, elite or the systems they are reacting to it? No option, or do you think that can lead to a reset?
I don't think it can lead to any reset in the medium term. But in the medium term, Trump will be no longer there. And therefore, if better sense prevails and the United States goes back to its old moorings, even if it remains an arbitrary power which wants to be hegemonic, but under the garb of at least some kind of a transatlantic unity and some common ground with Europe and as part of West domination of the world. After all, G7 is what? G7, if you just, Japan has been brought in because Japan, essentially, for reasons that we know, has been co-opted. But basically, global hegemony has been based uh, at, with the US power at the center and its allies, European allies, and Canada included, as part of a larger body that dominates global the global scene in every sense, economically, socially, politically, ideas, media, what have you. So they may go back to that after Trump is over. But in this intervening period, Europe will not know what to do. Now, they want to build up a European army. They want to be able to exert their influence independent of the United States. But how will they do it? First of all, it's not one united country. There are differences within the European Union, and they're coming out more and more in the open. Hungary, Slovakia, on some issues, even Poland on issues of migration and everything else, they have a very different view of some other countries. Spain, again, is not always on the same wavelength as the rest of Europe. Now, France and Germany uh, are not no longer the central driving forces of Europe. After all, they are the ones. It is because of their historical enmity that it was decided to create the European Coal and Steel Community, and then it evolved into the European Union eventually. But the motors were France and Germany. Now, France and Germany don't see eye to eye to each other with each other. Germany says that we would, ambition is to become the strongest military power in Europe. What does that mean? To fight against whom? Against Russia, against United States, against France? And will the French be comfortable with the idea of a revival of a militaristic
But so
Germany?
Germany is spending a lot of money. I was seeing the defense allocation. It's in the top five nations in the world now. So it's again rearming itself. It's spending money. It's probably realizing that they need to have a strong army.
Exactly. Now, the other thing is that is is their geopolitical vision that of permanent hostility with Russia? Now, it doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
If the situation evolves and they have a biomedia of some sort with Russia, and Russia once again becomes part of a larger European home of some sorts, then what happens? All this defense expenditure building up and arms. You see, when you build up a European army, it has to have a European command. Who will be? What will that command be? It was very easy when it was NATO because everybody deferred to United States because the disparity of power between United States and others was so large that they were happy to come under the umbrella of United States. But if it is Europe, then who will dominate Europe? And can they collectively work together and share defense responsibilities and defense production, have a common system by which they can do that? And then the Baltic states and Poland, actually, they don't believe in that kind of a European military strategic autonomy concept. They want to rely on the United States. And then there's rivalry. If you look at Europe today with Britain out, the only nuclear power is France. The only permanent member of the Security Council is France. So France has a certain vision of its role in Europe, and they have the capacities. But the other countries don't want to rely on France.
Hmm.
So therefore, they choose the American option. In the latest thing, what France has said is that we the additional money that Europe will spend on defense
Hmm.
should be spent on buying European arms, not
Hmm.
American arms. But the Dutch are saying no, we will buy American arms.
Hmm.
So I don't think they can create a European army with a credible infrastructure of intervention and command unless Europe is one nation with one central authority. That's not going to happen.
But sir,
That's not.
historically, Europe had strong armies. If we go back before First World War or maybe Second World War, Germany was a military power. And with NATO not surviving, if it manages to buy or capture Greenland, does NATO survive? And if NATO does not survive, does European Union survive? Does it not upend the entire structure which has been built up after going on after World War II? Because
Yes.
with then
I,
how does European Union survive without a NATO?
no, the European Union can survive without NATO. uh, provided there is no aggression by the United States against Europe, because taking over Greenland by force
Hmm.
is aggression. Now, in that situation, yes, uh, NATO, the raison d'etre for NATO will no longer exist. And there will be such fissures that will develop within Europe that European unity, already shaky, will begin to crack.
Then it's a
That is,
trust issue. If one nation, like for example, Germany spends more on military, that then leads to trust issues. Your neighbors also have to factor it in because there could be a German Trump. Germany had a Trump version a few decades ago.
but you know what the French military nuclear doctrine is? De Gaulle's nuclear doctrine,
Hmm.
tous azimuts, which means all points of the compass. That it was not only directed against in one direction, it was in all directions. And what did it mean? It actually meant defense against Germany also.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So if Germany aspires to be the strongest military power,
Hmm.
it'll be still short of nuclear weapons, incidentally.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it'll not be a permanent member of the Security Council.
Hmm.
So French are not going to accept that overlordship.
Hmm.
This will create big tensions within Europe. I
Hmm.
think now, for example, on this Mercosur EU agreement,
Hmm.
there's the clear division between Germany and France, because the French agriculturists, farmers are up against, and the French government and Macron can't afford to alienate the farmers, and and France is a very big agricultural power, but Germany is not. Germany is an industrial power, so it looks at openings in Latin America for their own industry. So there is a clear division of interests in this case. This will then extend to so many other fields. And there is now a feeling in the European Union, in many circles, that Brussels is acquiring too much power. And in fact, it is taking decisions on issues of defense expenditure and everything else, which they are not empowered to do, because these are sovereign decisions. This is happening. Uh, so I think the outlook for Europe, in all senses, is not very good. And this brings to me to another question which you haven't asked, but is very pertinent, which is India's relations with Europe. Now, if Europe was stable, uh, and its future was not only assured, but it was on the road to becoming an independent pole, acquiring strategic autonomy, being able to assert their will and their priorities on the global stage, even when they differ from the United States, then it'll be big bonanza for us to have strong relationship with an entity like that. But if this entity is not unsure, is on uncertain ground, its future is not very clear, when there are internal tensions which can derail the European project, then what happens? Then how Europe will still be important, but how important would it be as an alternative strategy for us?
Sir, because interestingly, what you said, we are doing two defense deals. One with France now, Rafale, they are saying 100 Rafale, 134 Rafale. And the second, incidentally, with Germany, where we are doing the biggest ever submarine deal for $8 billion. So maybe, as anybody who is in politics in Europe, after what Trump has done, they have to have a rethink in their own national interest. How can they ignore all that Trump has said? You could ignore it before Venezuela. He comes, he blusters, he speaks, but with what he pulled off in Venezuela, and I will now shift to Iran, with what he is attempting to pull off in Iran, how can a serious politician or a serious administrator ignore what Trump says now?
No, as I said earlier, I am sure, I'm sure that there is a lot of uh, ill feeling towards United States in European political, economic, media circles. There's no doubt about it. There has to be the manner in which the United States under Trump is dealing with Europe, and Trump's personality and his heckling and his mockery and his insulting, humiliating behavior. It's quite clear. That's one part of it. The other is that many of these elites who are governing Europe are American products. This also is there. After all, Merz was what? He was the head of BlackRock. Uh, so, and similarly, if you look at the background of many of the leaders in Europe, they have connections with Soros. They have a connection with the American deep state, and they have been actually, if you look at what is written about how they have been picked up, in the youth programs and this and that, in which the Americans were involved, and how they were picked up with the WEF. In fact, many of them have been trainees, youth trainees with the World Economic Forum. So there is also this belief that is now current, that these people who were creatures of the United States, in some senses, are unable to uh, draw themselves away from those connections, and therefore a big gap is developing between the elites and the public in Europe. And therefore, once these current elites are out of the scene, if they are out of the scene, then Europe might move in a different direction. Anyway, these are all speculative things, but the long and short, in response to your question, is that Europe is in disarray. Its leadership doesn't know uh, which way to go, because they can't go back to Russia, and they can't oppose the United States beyond a certain point. So if the United States is totally irrational and Trump is totally irrational and makes all kinds of demands, they are not in a position to resist. Their economies are not doing well. They have taken some very wrong decisions on the energy side, which is actually undermining their own economy, with the result that many of the companies, especially in Germany, because of cheaper energy, are shifting to United States. So there is a deindustrialization of Europe that's going on. And with China, they have a very fraught relationship, because they see China as a systemic challenge, and China is presenting competition to them which they cannot bear. When Macron, when he went to China, he said very, very openly that you have to open up your market to us. It cannot continue to be an unequal relationship. So they can't turn towards the United States. They can't turn against the United States. They can't turn towards Russia. They cannot embrace China. France is losing a lot of ground in Africa. Uh, so what do? India is a choice.
So as you
India,
said, bonanza for India if
yeah,
a big
great
bloc
choice.
comes free, comes loose, if a big European Union comes loose, some nations which are economic power with a lot of technology, maybe a bonanza for India, sir, if all this plays out.
Honestly, the choice, obviously, India presents itself as a obvious choice, and for us, as we can see, we are trying to woo Europe, and we want to sign the FTA. But there's a bit of a problem, since I've served in Europe a long time, and I was in charge of Europe in the Foreign Office also. The European media and the European intellectual circles, academic circles, uh, they are not they are, they are they are prejudiced against India. Well, it's a different matter at the leadership level, where they look coolly at their self-interest, and they see advantage uh, in engaging India. That's all right. But if you look at their media, whether it's Le Monde in France or Deutsche Welle in Germany, or in Britain, if you look at their press, the Financial Times or what have you, or the Economist, uh, the kind of stuff they write about India. So it is it's not as if they have embraced India as an option uh, without afterthought. And I think when we have the FTA, and when it goes to the European Parliament for approval, we may have some difficulties on this human rights issues, minority issues. These are issues in on which this wokeism in Europe is very much present.
Interesting times, sir. But now I want to come to Iran. I saw your tweet, sir, on Iran. where you said, and I saw two or three of your tweets, with all the arson that is going on, how are these peaceful protests? The street may have genuine grievances, but why distort the reality in pursuit of an agenda of regime change? Issue here is not the fate of Iran's clerical regime, but external forces fanning the flames to achieve long-held political objectives. In your replying to Yevita Cooper, and talking about what is happening in Iran, which is in a sense, at least for Iraq, they had created, as you said, some justification, no matter how tenable and untenable it was. But here they are going straight in, or they are appearing to go straight in. So, sir, how do you see Iran playing out specifically with China and Russia being much closer to Iran than to Venezuela? They already have lost Venezuela, big oil, the highest, largest oil reserves in the world. Now, Iran also, one of the countries which was a potential supplier of oil, specifically to China. Russia has oil. And if they lose Iran also, so would China sit pretty and let it happen and lose without fighting? Or what is going to play out? What is happening?
I think both Russia and China uh, are in trouble in Iran because beyond a certain point, uh, they cannot intervene. After all, when United States and Trump attacked the Iran's nuclear installations, apart from condemnation, there's nothing much that either Russia or China could do. In the case of Venezuela, of course, Venezuela is far away. They couldn't do anything very much. In the case of Iran, uh, the they have given military assistance to Iran, and if what we see on the internet is true, that they gave them the equipment to jam into the Starlink and everything else, so that uh, the the uh, the the street could not then organize themselves through internet and all that for whatever they were doing. Uh, but militarily, China cannot intervene, neither will Russia intervene. Iran has considerable military strength. It's not like Venezuela. The American bases are very close, within range of Iran. Saudi Arabia is extremely vulnerable. They can actually knock out the Saudi gas infrastructure very easily. They can, after all, Qatar base is right across the Persian Gulf. They can attack it. Uh, so, uh, so Iran is not that helpless. Now, the point is, how far will Iran want to go to defend itself? It has the capacity. And more than that, it can, in a suicidal act, actually block the Hormuz Straits, which will then mean that the price of oil will shoot up and will actually do huge damage to the world economy, including that of the United States. So it's not as if Iran is vulnerable to that extent. The only thing is, can they take the risk of doing it? Because the reaction to this will be very, very strong, and it will be an all-out war, which will be extremely, extremely costly and damaging for the region. So I don't think that they need that kind of military support or intervention from China and Russia to uh, to uh, uh, to challenge the West. I think the limits are elsewhere. Limits is uh, the fact that they will then be attacked. Of course, they can do a lot of damage, but there's a lot of damage to be done to them, and the regime will not be able to survive. It'll be a breakdown of the Iranian society as such, and the Iranian political entity as such, and potentially a civil war or what have you. So these scenarios are terrible, terrible. Will Trump risk it? I hope not. I hope not. Um, the Insofar as assuming that none of this happens, that there is no all-out war, and somehow the regime survives, and even if there are some pot shots taken at the regime in some ways or the other, still they hold on. China will not be bothered. They'll continue to buy oil from Iran if it is available. They have not adhere to oil sanctions as India has against Iran. So they'll continue to do that. So the entire scenario is extremely worrisome. And what you see, the point is, I'm not you just not played out my tweets. We have, I have no love lost, or we have no love lost for the regime in Tehran. After all, in some ways, they've also been troublesome for us on Kashmir and this and that. Khamenei, especially, and we have reacted officially to some of Khamenei's statements on Kashmir. Uh, we have not bought oil from Iran because we accepted the Western US sanctions on Iran. Our trade is very limited, about 1.6, 1.8 billion dollars, especially. It's all humanitarian goods, food, medicine, and stuff like that. Uh, it is important to us in terms of the international North-South corridor, our access to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, Chabahar. These are, and that's why we keep a dialogue open with Iran. We've always kept our dialogue open. At the political level, we continue to maintain contacts, and to that extent, we have defied the United States or America. Uh, but um, the point is, if you go back to how the West encouraged Iraq, Saddam Hussein to attack Iran, you go back in order to dislodge the mullah regime, and the fact that the Americans have never forgiven them for taking hostages. They, Israel has done. Israel has been taking, um, has actually been killing their atomic scientists uh, even before this military exchanges took place. Uh, Look at the draconian sanctions on Iran for years. You know, I don't know if you've seen, Ishkaran, the 2005 or 2005 Brookings report on how to handle Iran. It is
No,
so
sir.
clear. Whatever they said there about how the regime can be pulled down through
Mm,
sanctions, to starving the people, to creating conditions for street uprising, everything is there. Everything is there. Uh,
mm,
so they have been following a particular uh, game plan. Uh, and nevertheless, Iran, through various means, has survived. They found ways and means to bypass sanctions. UAE has been cooperative. Oman has been cooperative. China has been buying their oil. Russia has been supporting them. So they have survived, with, but with a lot of economic punishment, which has been reflected in social disorder and opposition to the regime every now and then, which they have crushed. So in our case, in my case, so it is not that we are in favor of the mullah regime. It is that we can see the thing objectively, that if things have come to pass in Iran the way they have, there is a very important part of responsibility for doing this that falls on the shoulders of the West, United States and Europe, United States and Europe. So for them then to sort of take this moralistic position, the regime is killing civilians and this and that, they're forgetting their own responsibility for creating conditions on the ground where there would be a street revolt because of economic shortages and other shortages, which then, once in a country of 90 million people, which is subject to such external pressure,
mm.
then able to survive, you can't have democracy. Then you have to have a certain kind of very centralized, tough government which will protect national security. And that's what the position is. That's what the situation is. But constant barrages of human rights, this and that, pressures on the nuclear side, humiliating them as they have done, sanctions, snapback sanctions, everything else. So they have done everything possible to dislodge this regime, and the regime has fought back with all the means at its command. What I mean is that the responsibility for what is happening is shared, both by the regime of the clerics as well as Western intervention in Iran.
Sir, but once they have collapsed the economics, the inflation is at an all-time high. Anyways, any regime in power for almost 40, 45 years is going to face a lot of anti-incumbency from various interest groups in any country. And on top of that, if there is unemployment, inflation, sanctions, Everybody who travels out or is on social media sees how modern democratic countries are being run, and Iran was that. It had a lot of prosperity pre 1979 and has a lot of people outside Iran. Sir, the people are seeming to be revolting, and once people are revolting, the only case against US intervention broadly is not talking about international law. They don't put boots on grounds because they can't afford coffins to go back. But what they pulled off in Venezuela, and they're either bluffing or they are saying they used sonic weapons, whether they bought out the entire palace guard or they used sonic weapons. Their press secretary shared a account of how they've used sonic weapons, and people collapsed like a Hollywood movie. But I do not know whether that's a bluff or that's actually a weapon. But Venezuela has, in a sense, made a test case for Americans not having to send boots on grounds to effect a regime change. And would that not be Iran's biggest worry? That without boots on grounds, if they do it, can Iran defend itself?
Oh, yes, it can. Without boots on ground, you can create a regime change in inverted commas and create chaos. But how do you stabilize? I mean, you can do that, then how do you stabilize? After all, you have to have a body of people who can then take over power. To begin with, then you have to have elections for which you need stability and peace, and then you have a new government. But that can't be that can't happen through external intervention. There has to be an internal consensus on the way forward, where the regime has to reach out to the opponents and, let's say, seeing the dangers that are ahead of a collapse of the country in various ways, that you try and reach out and see if you can have some kind of a domestic understanding on how to go forward. As we have seen, there are huge demonstrations in favor of the government. And there is the IRGC people, who will make sure that the integrity of the country is protected and the sovereignty is protected to the extent possible. Okay, you can decapitate the regime as the Assad was thrown out of Syria, but has Syria got stabilized? And what have they done in Syria? I mean, if the perspective is to bring about democracy, have they brought democracy in Syria? They put an old Islamic State, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra fellow as the head of state, just catapulted in there without elections. He declared himself president, and they accepted it. And he goes and meet Trump in the White House, and van der Leyen and others go, and Costa go and meet him in Syria. Is that the perspective they have for Iran? And Iran is not like Venezuela or Syria. It's a powerful country in its own right. Look, with all the sanctions that they have been subjected to for decades, look at the military capacity they created, the damage they caused to Israel when there was this exchange of missiles. Israel suffered a lot. I can tell you, it's true. So they did that. They have a lot of talent. In the country, scientific talent in the country. They have
So what
great.
I found interesting is Saudi Arabia, Washington Post is reporting, has told US not to attack Iran. And then there are people saying Saudi Arabia has told that we have informed Iran that do not use our airspace. Nobody will use our airspace to attack Iran. So Saudi Arabia, which one thought was completely in American lap, is coming out against America to the limited ability they have, persuading, lobbying, etc., and saying, please do not attack Iran. What is the logic behind that for Saudi Arabia to take that stance?
They learned a lesson when the Houthis, through only a few drones, brought the Saudi Aramco to a standstill. They just attacked in a few spots, and the refinery could not function. Saudi Arabia, quite rightly, wants to move in a different direction, modernize the country, rely increasingly less and less on oil, and develop like UAE has done and Dubai has done, to become a more modern economy, which means controlling all these Islamics and everything else which they're doing. This 9 project, 230 project, if it develops, will completely change the face of Saudi Arabia. They have liberalized the moral code. Women can drive, and this and that and that and that. Now, entire thing. Who will invest in Saudi Arabia if Iran goes and does something in Saudi Arabia. So that is the reason why they decided to have diplomatic relations. They exchanged embassies, and they've been visiting each other. In fact, when Trump was in Saudi Arabia, the Larijani, the former national security advisor and now the closest aide to Khamenei, he was there in Saudi Arabia too. So Saudi Arabia wants to weaken Iran, but also doesn't want to have the risk of
Mm.
becoming actually a casualty in a US-Iranian confrontation and then have permanent instability. If Iran is unstable, it will mean instability in this region, and that will actually damage a lot the programs and ambitions and aspirations of the Gulf countries. So that's the reason why Saudi Arabia is cautioning Washington not to go that far. Uh, but yet, in the heart of hearts, they would like a weakening of
Mm.
Iran because Iran is looming. In a way, it is a bit like not the same thing. I don't want to draw that parallel. That if China was weakened, we'll be happy.
Mm.
Uh, you know, but at the same time, we wouldn't want to say this openly and this and that. That
Mm.
uh, if US and China were to get caught in some military confrontation and this and that, we might benefit from that. I mean, no, I'm not speaking. I'm just making the point that
Yeah, any powerful rival weakening is not something any nation is going to object to,
but,
especially when
but,
they are not doing it.
but at the same time, we wouldn't want a military confrontation between
Mm.
US and China because then our interests will be hurt because the entire uh, order in Asia will be, and global order will be disturbed, and we'll have a cost to pay too. So that's the reason why Saudi Arabia is blowing hot and cold.
So last thing I want to cover is your tweet on Operation Sindoor and India, and Pakistan had complete information from satellite about which ship, which strike or pivot, which core unit or which aircraft was moving where. When they connected the dots, they said that time has come to stop this war. The implication of this very disquieting. The implication of this is very disquieting. Pakistan has no such capacity of its own, an area of our weakness too. If they had such information in real time, they were helped. Obviously, China did, as mentioned by Deputy Army Chief Lieutenant General Singh in July 2005. And I want to just add to this one thing. Pakistan is again sending drones. Last 3 days, we have heard drones are trying to come to Jammu Kashmir. They are trying to drop something, etc., etc. So, sir, what do you think is India's response adequate? A or and B, is American or Chinese interest wanting this region also to be destabilized either from Bangladesh side or Pakistan side, and to put this area also in flux, in which the most of the burnt would come on India?
See, one can then take a kind of empirical view based on US actions globally. US wants to dominate Latin America. Quite clearly, revival of the Monroe Doctrine, even when Latin America has such big, powerful countries like Brazil. And in fact, there's 500% tariffs that they are threatening for those who are uh, you know, collaborating with Russia, includes Brazil also. They are now, in a sense, destabilizing Europe, even though the Europeans are their allies. They are treating China as their principal adversary. And though they are compromising with China temporarily, because China has a handle on them, they're trying to develop alternative uh, capacities in areas where China is dominating technology, and then they'll have a freer hand. Then they'll have a freer hand. Uh, so uh, they want to dominate the Middle East through Israel. The entire Abraham Accords and this and that is to, through Israel, actually dominate. And then they want to actually, the US wants to be the own, what, 50% of the global oil production and capacity. Now, in this situation, looking at empirically, why should they be kind to India? I mean, why? Why is India so special? Why is India so more special than Europe and their old allies? Uh, so, uh, and of course, they don't want a strong Russia. That is quite clear. Therefore, I think our concern that forces will always, external forces will always find ways and means, or try and find ways and means to keep us under pressure, to make us aware that they have instruments in their hand which they can use as pressure points, and therefore make India more amenable to certain openings that they may want from us. And we, unlike China or even Russia, uh, are much more vulnerable because of our diversity and our internal political forces, uh, which actually are openly inviting foreign countries to the Western world to come and interfere in our domestic politics, saying that the world has a stake in Indian democracy. So if there is a dilution of Indian democracy, then the world has a responsibility to do something about it. So, and if you look at the reason why they're talking about dilution of democracy, then you can understand in which direction we are going, minority rights and stuff like that. And that's the vulnerability we have in India. We are not as strict about controlling NGOs and the NGOs actually, time and again, we have discovered that the NGOs, which are financed from outside, are actually the tools in the hands of the West to condition public opinion and at a suitable time to create internal disturbances and opposition. And yet we are not able to have policy which would, in effect, not allow any foreign NGO to operate in India or Indian NGOs to accept
So
foreign
you
money.
tried the FCRA law changes, which the Supreme Court said there is no fundamental right to receive foreign funding. My principal question when this entire thing started was there is so much of homelessness if you go to just California. There's so much of drug abuse. And just giving one example, the richest state of US, right? I'm not even going into other states. I'm not even going to Europe. When they have so many problems there, why are they so generous that their so-called philanthropists are sending money to India? You have not managed to solve your own problems at the very basic poverty level itself, or at drug addiction level, or at the level of medical crisis you go through where people can't afford your medicines. So anybody sending here is not going to be more humane to Indians than he is to his own citizens. So that means there has to be an ulterior motive. That sounds a very simplistic explanation, but to my mind, it always troubles me. It's not as if there are no problems in US. Why would you be sending money to India?
See, a couple of things. One is that what you have pointed out in terms of the American polity, the American system, this has been true for a long time, in the sense that it's a very brutal capitalistic system. It's not like Europe, where you have social security, we have medical benefits, you have unemployment benefits, uh, where there are, for a long time, certain socialist ideas are very much part of mainstream governance, etc., etc. So, to that extent, Europe is not built on the basis of predatory capitalism, which United States is. Which is why, if you look at inequality in United States, inequality is terrible. 1% of the population owns 60, 70% of the global wealth, and 10% of the population, I don't know if the figures are correct because I'm speaking from memory, owns 90% of the population. The middle class is in terrible shape in the United States. But and then all the drugs and everything else, what you pointed out is the reality. Now Trump is fighting this externally by invading countries and and threatening to invade more and making it a central feature of their tariff policy, including vis-a-vis China, the issue of fentanyl and all that. They can't control drug addiction at home, and they want to be able to control the source of these drugs. But there will be no source unless there was a market. But they can't control the market, and that's where the problem is. So, the
Mm.
point you're making about America not giving priority to improving their own social conditions back home Uh, there have been a lot of debates in America, Medicare, this and that. These are
So my
really
point is, why would somebody send money to whatever they generally send it to NGOs for some humane purpose, right? It could be building schools, it could be building homes, it could be cleaning water, it could be anything. So when you yourself still have humane problems, for a rich person to send money to India has to be an ulterior motive. You only send money if you are hungry in your own house or one member of your own house is hungry. You won't be doing charity outside, sir.
couple of things. One is evangelists, for example,
Hmm.
who sort of give money to foreign NGOs, including in India. They have a different objective altogether.
So then, sir,
Uh,
it's not a humane objective. No, it's again a conversion objective,
It is most humane. They want to save the souls.
saving our souls.
Save the souls. What can be more humane than that? And then, of course, then when you look at uh, this fellow, uh, the former Microsoft head, what's his name?
Bill Gates, sir.
Bill
All
Gates. Bill Gates. Uh, he finances a lot of these NGOs and this and that. Look at the health sector,
mm,
ostensibly with a view to improving the health conditions of
mm, mm,
people in third world country or the developing countries, including India.
mm,
But there is a whole literature which says how much he profits from it, how much
mm.
he profits from it. So the WEF has a certain philosophy uh, of destroying the family, of making it atomizing society and making the society people entirely dependent on the state, so nothing else matters. So that kind of a philosophy. Then the wokeism, they want to internationalize it. LGBT rights, they want to internationalize it. It is treated as a geopolitical issue that if a country doesn't give LGBT rights, then somehow it has to be punished and sanctioned and this and that. I mean, they operate at different levels in the sense that there would be elements in America who would have their own agendas. We're not so much bothered about removing some of the inequities and problems, social problems in the United States with drug trafficking in California or elsewhere. But in their view, uh, they have a different kind of agenda, and behind that agenda would be US aid, and behind US aid would be the CIA. So
Mm.
these are part of preserving a hegemonic order in which what you think are your values, your systems, your way of looking at things, how society should develop, what should be the relationship between individual and state. These are the things that you want to propagate so that the world becomes more hospitable and accepts intellectually your domination. That is a larger purpose. They work at different levels. This is how it
I
is.
fully agree with what you started off with, that we need to crush these, or we have not managed to have a way out with these foreign funded NGOs, even though we have tightened the norms. But to my mind, it's a huge problem, sir. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir, for your time and explaining all these events. Hopefully, the world will come to some sort of an equilibrium, some sort of a sense. Otherwise, we'll keep disturbing you, sir, for your perspective on all this.
Well, you've got 3 years more. So long as Trump is there, there always will be issues to
I
discuss.
feel now, sir, after Trump also this will last, because once these oil companies, whatever they have their investments there, then we are work back to the great powers of the world dividing their areas of influence. Only thing is, I hope India gets some influence there, because Europe has collapsed. But if Russia retains Ukraine based on this and China does
We will,
something on Taiwan,
we
we are
will,
back
we'll,
to
dis-
zones of influence.
we'll discuss this next time. My own view is that the US corporate sector is much more globalist than Trump is. So at the moment, they are under the thumb of Trump. They don't want to oppose him because Trump is so unpredictable. He can do anything, and he's so powerful within United States that he can virtually do anything. So they are lying low. But that globalist ambitions, aspirations of U.S. capital will always be there. So therefore, I think the world may not actually, as you said, uh, okay, put it differently, that U.S. behavior and conduct internationally may not necessarily remain the same post-Trump. although the legacy of Trump would be there.
So next time we will discuss this because to my mind it will be a fight between globalist tendencies versus resource capture, which can happen if you get Greenland, Venezuela, Iran. So it is a globalist versus resource capture fight, which probably will play out. Sir. Anyways, we will see. Sir. I'll take your views and I'll discuss this with you next time, sir.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you
My,
so much, sir, for your time.
my pleasure. Bye bye.
Thank you.